SEC scheduling, though, Ross Dellinger kind of broke Twitter. I believe this was on Friday of SI.com
Yep.
when he just tweeted two beer mugs clinking and a screenshot of what is their best guess at what the SEC scheduling will look like in
The good old Apple
2024.
Notes app that
That's
was
right.
straight
I
from his
mean,
iPhone.
that's right. Probably in the back of an Uber, just throwing it together in his notes app, like we've all done if you work in this industry. Uh, but this is in 2024 when Texas and Oklahoma come over. The proposed scheduling model probably includes a 9-game conference schedule, and each team would have 3, quote, permanent opponents, although the permanency of those opponents is a little bit in question. Trey, I'm going to let you kind of run through this, and we've got the screenshot attached in our notes doc. So run us through the teams and who their at least best guessed opponents will be, and then we'll just kind of talk about our initial impressions, winners, losers, if we think those exist as it currently stands right now. But I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, so I'll go and run through top to bottom as this was reported. So starting with Missouri, they're going to have Oklahoma, Arkansas, Vanderbilt. Arkansas will have Missouri, Texas, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, LSU, Texas, Mississippi State, Texas, Oklahoma, Texas A&M, and Arkansas, Oklahoma, Texas, Missouri, and Florida. LSU, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, and Alabama. Ole Miss will have Mississippi State, LSU, and Arkansas. Mississippi State will have Ole Miss, Kentucky, and Texas A&M. Alabama will have Auburn, Tennessee, and LSU. Auburn, rest in peace, will have Alabama, Georgia, and Vanderbilt, mercifully. Vanderbilt, Tennessee, Auburn, and Missouri. Tennessee will have Vanderbilt, Alabama, and South Carolina. Kentucky, Mississippi State, South Carolina, and Georgia. Georgia, Auburn, Florida, Kentucky. Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, and Oklahoma. And finally, South Carolina will have Florida, Tennessee, and Kentucky. So, as the circus music played behind that description there, hopefully you had your notepad out or you're following along on Twitter. But lots of interesting matchups there, right? I think the first thing that everyone looked for was, okay, what big game is no longer going to happen every year? What major rivalry is no longer going to happen every year? And I don't think you can say if this holds up being true, which all indications, no one's really come out and said, no, tap the brakes on this. If this holds up being true, I don't think you can say any major every year rivalry goes away. Maybe, I don't know. Like, I really struggled to find one that I felt like had to be played that was going away.
Well, sir, you're forgetting about the most important trophy in all of the Southeastern Conference, the Bonham
The Bonham
Trophy.
Trophy is well, it'll get played every
It's
other
still
year.
there, but
Yeah.
Texas A&M and South Carolina will no longer play on a year-to-year basis. I know that I think there's weeping and gnashing of teeth across the country at losing that great
That
rivalry.
storied college football tradition that we're
No, you're right. I think all the major traditional rivalries are protected. I know that Arkansas and Texas A&M have played in some, I mean, historically great games
yeah.
over the last several years, over the last decade plus. That's not going to be an annual thing, but overall, I mean, you look down this list. Arkansas gets to renew their rivalry with Texas every year. A&M keeps the LSU rivalry and a thorn in their side in Mississippi State, a team that they just have not been able to beat consistently. Oklahoma gets obviously Texas. I guess they get their Big 12 rival back in Missouri, and they pick up an interesting game against Florida. I mean,
Well,
on and
not
on
even
it
just the Big
goes.
12 for that Oklahoma Missouri. That's a game that's been played for 70 plus years,
Yeah,
going back to the Big 8 days. So that one was always going to happen. But I cut you off right before you're going to say it. Oklahoma Florida, that's a fun new rivalry that we're going
sure.
to get out of this too.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many that I think really make a whole lot of sense. So, let's kind of get into who wins, who loses out. And I don't know that again, this is not final. This is not confirmed. We probably won't have a yay or nay on this exact schedule from the SEC until SEC Media Days in August, likely, I'd imagine. But overall, there are 3 teams that stick out to me that are quote winners from this. I think they have manageable permanent opponents. And then I put 2 teams that I think get the toughest slate. I don't know that there are winners and losers necessarily, but it's an easy way to frame this discussion. I'm curious to see if you have any winners that are either similar to mine or maybe outside of the three I picked.
Yeah, so your winners were, if I'll go ahead and just throw those out there. Your winners were Oklahoma, Tennessee, and Georgia.
Mhm.
I completely agree with those three. Oklahoma again getting Texas, Mizzou, and Florida. Obviously, they already play Texas every year. Missouri and Florida, neither one of those programs is really going to cause you to shake in your boots at this moment in time in 2023. Florida obviously could get there, right? Florida
Mhm.
could be a big problem for Oklahoma in the future years if Billy Napier is able to get it together. But as of right now, that's not going to be the toughest possible trio. Tennessee, I think, South Carolina is obviously on the upswing. I think that's
They
going to
are.
be a really tricky rival for them, but obviously
Mhm.
getting Vanderbilt every single year is going to be um, optimal. We'll phrase it
Helpful.
that way.
It's helpful.
It's helpful to the cause for sure. And they're already playing Alabama every year, so
Yeah.
that's not really changing at all. And Georgia, I think you're spot on. I don't think you could have picked. Obviously they're going to get Auburn every year. That's a huge rivalry game. And if they had to pick, they're going to keep Florida. Obviously, that's another huge rivalry game. They avoid getting someone like Alabama. I'd seen Alabama, Georgia thrown around
Yeah.
by some in the media podcasting community. I know that was probably a wishful thinking for the most part, but
Saban would have had an
they could have done that.
aneurysm.
They could have gone
Yeah.
for the big brands. They could have gone for the big ratings and had Alabama and Georgia play every year, but they did not. They get Kentucky instead. I think that's definitely a favorable matchup for Georgia.
Yeah.
Looking around
Well,
the other ones, Mississippi State's a tough one because other than Ole Miss, they don't really have any natural bitter rivals in the
mm,
SEC. Obviously, they've played everybody forever. They've been a founding member of the conference, but it seems like they're kind of just everybody else's also ran team. Like it's just another divisional game for the other SEC West teams. So, I don't. I think they could have done a lot worse than Ole Miss, Kentucky, Texas A&M. Like
sure.
that, they've done very well against Texas A&M over the past decade that A&M's been in the
Mhm.
conference. So I think you could call Mississippi State a winner there. Looking around, Vanderbilt, they're going to have an uphill battle, but them getting Missouri and likewise Missouri getting Vanderbilt, I think is good for both of those programs to kind of feel confident about one of their permanent rivals. So, overall, I think this is a really, really good list. And we can get into the losers in just a second. But yeah, I definitely add Mississippi State to the winners list.
Yeah, I think, for the Bulldogs, look, Kentucky's just such an interesting team because
Yeah.
they've had some really good seasons. And then they have, a really not a bad season necessarily, but a disappointing year, especially after Mark Stoops fired it at Calipari saying, "Oh, we're just a basketball school." Like that's not true. And then they have an absolute stinker of a season. So I just think Kentucky's always going to be a team that if they win 8, 9 games, you go, "Oh, good for Kentucky," right? If they win
They're never going
10,
to be a powerhouse, though.
but they're never going to be a
At least
powerhouse.
in their current iteration, short of something radically changing there, they're never going to be a powerhouse. And so for Mississippi State to be able to play them every year, I think that's a pretty even matchup because I don't think Mississippi State's ever going to be an absolute powerhouse ever either.
I think we can get into who loses out. I had two teams at Alabama and Florida having the toughest roads to me. So Alabama, if you missed that list earlier, Auburn, Tennessee, LSU. That is a brutal trifecta to play every single year because one, Tennessee and LSU are on the major upswing right now. Tennessee just beat them. LSU just beat them as well. LSU is recruiting, on or just one notch below the same level as they are. And Josh Heupel and that Tennessee team is not that far behind. And for Auburn, if you listen to my interview with Blake Lane from the Uptempo podcast, we specifically talked about the Iron Bowl and why Auburn can make that a game, has made that a game the last decade, even though for several of those years, Alabama has been a full cut above what War Eagle can put out on the field. And so go listen to that podcast if you haven't already. I think Blake really lays out why that is always a game no matter the records. I mean, that truly is a throw the records out special.
Yep.
And so for Alabama to not get a break, right? It feels like almost every one of these teams has one opponent that you go, okay, even in a down year, they can probably get one of these games going forward, right? Like if your team can go 1-2 in this carousel in a bad year, it's probably pretty fair. It's probably pretty even. I don't know that anybody if the wheels were to fall off Alabama, I don't know that you feel good about them. Oh, well, at least they can coast to a win versus X, right? And, going along with that, Nick Saban was very public about his displeasure. He said, and I quote, I've always been an advocate for playing more conference games, but if you play more games, I think you have to get the three fixed opponents right. They're giving us Tennessee, Auburn, and LSU. I don't know how they come to that decision, end quote. I mean, not a happy camper in the Saban household right now.
Poor Nick Saban. The whole college football world and the SEC has definitely been rigged against him for so long. Like,
That's
when is
right.
this guy going to catch a break, Mitch?
Yeah.
Like, everybody just seems to be lining up against him. No, Nick, you got to play Tennessee every single year. Your administration stood on your head to preserve. Look, that's a historic rivalry with Tennessee, but you got to benefit from that for 20 years while Tennessee was at the lowest their program has ever been. And now you want to turn around and cry that you have to play them every year. No, dude, that's part of having a historic rivalry. If you want to preserve it, you're going to preserve it. And that is a historic rivalry. Sorry that your historic rivals are good. But if you don't like that, maybe coach in a different conference. Don't coach at Alabama. Like Tennessee, that you got to benefit from playing them every single year, getting an automatic W for going on
Mhm.
20 plus years. You don't get to cry when all of a sudden they're good again and you still have to play them every single year. Now, we can debate about the LSU game. I think that game was just appointment viewing for the CBS one night game a year slot for so long. Obviously, it's been taken away the last couple of years with LSU down a little bit, but the fact that that had turned into like the marquee game that was on the schedule every year for the SEC, they weren't going to just take that away.
No.
That one makes sense to keep too. So all three of these make sense. It wasn't like they swapped, if they swapped LSU with Georgia, I think Nick would have a point, but these are all historic rivals that Alabama should be playing every single year in this model. So I don't know, like, does he want Vanderbilt? Who does he want to replace
Well,
with
he got
Vanderbilt?
Vanderbilt in the COVID year, and you didn't hear any complaining from Alabama then
Nope.
when the rest of the world went, how on earth? Who did they get? Alabama got
I'm
Vandy.
pulling that up right now because it was ridiculous.
It
But
was like, I mean, it was like the committee decided, okay, we're gonna give Alabama Vandy, and it wasn't Tennessee. I've forgotten who the other team was.
I think they did still play it. So they got Missouri, Georgia, which big, obviously that's a big one. But that was before Georgia was this Georgia.
Right.
Tennessee, Kentucky, and you know what? They actually didn't play Vanderbilt that year. I'm surprised. I remembered that too. Maybe that's a little Mandela effect, but they did not play Vanderbilt that year. They did play at Missouri and Kentucky though, so kind of considered lower tier of the
Maybe
SEC.
that was who they got. Yeah.
Beat
So
Kentucky 63-3. By the way, that was not a fun day for the Wildcats.
yeah. So listen. Is it tough? Yes. But Alabama has enjoyed several breaks. They obviously enjoy the best recruiting in the country on a year in year out basis, and I'm not saying that's given to them. I'm not saying that Nick Saban just snaps his fingers and that class comes together. Right? They work and they earn that top that spot atop the mountain. But it you know I, listen, you can't expect to get any breaks, especially like what you said, when you've got three very natural rivals that listen, this is not all sunshine and daisies putting a 16 team carousel together, right? People
Yep.
on Twitter make it out to be, oh, this is so easy and I can do this in my sleep. That's not, there are so many things that go on behind the scenes, right? There are
Yep.
so many factors that play into this. Did Alabama get one of the tougher trifectas? Yeah, they did. Are
Should
they?
they? Yes, they should
Yes.
because they like not. go back to pre Nick Saban. Obviously, they had some down years, but Alabama has been the standard in the Southeastern Conference almost since its inception. So, yeah, it's going to make sense that they're going to put you against the other standard bearers of the SEC. Again, do you want to swap LSU with Georgia? Like, we can do that, Nick, and you can complain even a little bit more, but like, that's who you should be comparing yourself to, and you shouldn't be afraid of it. It's just a weird look from Nick Saban. Like,
Yeah.
for somebody that's spent his entire career, you know, not really caring about that, just kind of putting his head down, avoiding the rat poison, not really making excuses. The last couple of years, he sure has been full of excuses. So we don't have to beat that dead horse again.
Yeah.
But it's just a weird look.
He's been very vocal.
Very
Uh,
grumpy old man the last couple of years.
definitely old man yells at cloud syndrome going on. No doubt. Other parts of this list that I think are just massive wins for college football, right? I think you look at the beginning of that list. I think you look at Arkansas, Texas A&M, and Texas, and the teams that they play. So for Texas, they get OU, they get Texas A&M, and they get Arkansas. That is what a lot of people had them. That was the trio that was on their wish list, right?
Yeah.
Keep the OU rivalry, obviously, reignite the rivalry with Texas A&M. We all want that, and then getting a team like Arkansas, who that's a Southwestern Conference rivalry from
Game that's
years
been
gone
played
by.
game that's been
Some-
played 70 plus times, I believe. It's
Yeah,
a big one.
some great games in recent years. That's just a rivalry that makes sense. And so to keep that one alive, I think makes just a boatload of sense. Similarly, for Texas A&M, they get to keep LSU on their schedule, which I think most Aggies, us included, wanted to happen. Look, will LSU ever replace the vitriol and just pure hate of a rival that Texas does? No, but we don't have to replace that anymore, right? We get
Right.
both, and I think it's very, very difficult for the Aggies. They're not winners in this format at all, but if you're going to be a team that recruits in the top 10 just about every single year, if you're a team that is going to pay off this massive contract that you've given Jimbo and live up to expectations that are not unfairly placed on this Aggie team, the talent, the facilities, the money in this program, the resources that they have. I mean, this is a team that can build to a 12-0 run in the conference, right? There's no reason that A&M can't build a program like Alabama, like Georgia did. And now to do that, they're really going to, if they ever climb that summit, it's never going to be a fluke, right? No one's
Right.
ever going to be able to
Yeah.
say, "Hey, you skated by on a weak schedule." No, you've got LSU, Texas, and the voodoo program that is Mississippi State. That A&M, whether it was
Any
Mike
sport.
Leach, yeah, whether it was Mike Leach at the helm or something in the water there in Stark Vegas, A&M has struggled with the Bulldogs, not just in football, honestly, as a program since they
They
joined the
lost in
SEC.
basketball and they had no reason losing a couple weeks ago.
That's right. So, I think it's a tough trifecta for A&M, but I think it's a very entertaining one and one that I'm really looking forward to seeing.
Well,
Are
and
there
just
any
as an
other?
A&M fan, personally, how I hope they set this up. I don't know. I don't really know if there's any way this could possibly happen, but traditionally, even before when A&M was in the Southwest Conference and LSU obviously was in the SEC, they would play Labor Day weekend. That was the opening game for both teams for I think like 30 years in a row or something like that. So if we could somehow make that work where the schedule is bookended by LSU and Texas, LSU week 1, Texas Thanksgiving week, you'd sign me up for that. Like that would be an incredible opener every single year.
It would be an incredible opener. It would wreck
Imagine the
somebody's season.
meltdowns in both of those fan bases, whoever loses that opening game every year.
I mean,
Play it
I
on
think,
Labor Day. Like that dude, like,
yeah,
yeah, it would
yeah.
be so cool.
Holiday weekend, the vibes from the holiday weekend just gone immediately. Yeah, that would be interesting. Or is there another team that you see that you feel like we need to talk about here, whether they're a winner or a loser?
I think LSU didn't get a great draw. And again, it's another one that it's like, if you're going to
Sure.
draw three teams that LSU should play, it probably is Ole Miss, Texas A&M, and Alabama, right? Ole Miss LSU is a very historic rivalry as well. They needed to preserve that one. Auburn, I made the joke, and the SEC did throw them a bone by giving them Vanderbilt, but playing Alabama and Georgia every year, they've already done that for decades, but that's
Yeah.
not going to get any easier. Wouldn't necessarily call them a loser just because that is something they've already had to
Yeah,
overcome
it was
as
already
a,
on their
as a
schedule. Yeah.
program. Florida, not an easy situation if Oklahoma gets their stuff together and South Carolina keeps ascending.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think overall, I just keep going back to, though, the SEC, if this is what we go with, no complaints from me. Like, you can
Yeah.
nitpick, you can say, oh, maybe A&M should be playing Arkansas because they have more recent history. But other than that, like, there is no complaints from me on this one.
Yeah. One benefit of not having A&M Arkansas on the Rhoda every year, it means that game more than likely has to move away from Jerry World, right?
Yep.
If you're
Yeah,
not playing it every year, it means it goes back on campus. That is something that you and I have been screaming about for years. Why are we playing
absolutely.
this at Jerry World? I would much rather go up to Fayetteville for a road game. I don't care that it's on the road. It's Fayetteville's awesome. Go
It's
play
meant
up
to
there.
be, and it's meant to play on campus. Like, it, OU Texas makes sense, right? That's the Cotton Bowl. That's a historic stadium. It's really the only thing keeping that stadium from being imploded and probably a historical marker. But, like, that's cool, right? It's split right down the middle. It's something that those fan bases have done. A&M Arkansas at Jerry World has always felt forced, and it's always
Yeah.
felt like a
Yeah.
second class to that game at the Cotton Bowl. So,
Yeah.
good riddance.
Yeah, I mean, there are years that it's not completely full. There have been a
I think
number of
every year
years.
it's not completely full. Like,
Yeah,
this year, it was probably closer to half
well,
empty.
exactly,
Full.
exactly. That's what I mean. Is you've had a couple years where it was extremely full and places rocking, right? That streak where they're going to overtime every year. Like, who didn't want a ticket to that game? But you ensure that there's very few empty tickets or unsold tickets if you put it back on campus, right? Nobody's missing a
Absolutely.
home game against Texas A&M, a home game against Arkansas. So, Jerry can be maybe sad about that for a little bit, but I'm sure he'll find another way to make oodles of money. So I'm not
And
really worried.
this is going to feel, I know the conference is getting bigger, but doing scheduling this way is going to do wonders for actually feeling like a conference. We've talked about this before, but just from an A&M perspective, A&M has never been to Georgia has never been to A&M.
Yes.
A&M's been in the SEC now for 10 full seasons. A&M has never traveled to Lexington, Kentucky. So that's just unheard of. That we've gone a full decade and those two matchups have not occurred in those places. That gets fixed. Every single student athlete that stays for 4 years will get to travel to every other stadium in the
Yeah.
SEC and host every other team. So that's awesome. That's a huge win for everybody.
Totally agree. Totally agree. All right. Well, let us know what you think about the SEC schedule. Do you have winners and losers from this? Would you change any of the matchups? Let us know at 3TechPod. You can also email us, 3techpod@gmail.com.
Gracious him. How about